There's nothing quite like a bit of good Brexiteer paranoia. And of course, there's no better purveyor of Brexiteer paranoia than, of course, Nigel Farage himself. And this was written last week when I think Boris Johnson at that time hadn't yet he had resigned, I think, by this time. But of course, we hadn't yet seen the Partygate report. And of course, all the Brexiteers were looking for excuses because obviously to them, Boris Johnson was the guy who delivered them Brexit. So there's a lot of Brexiteers who absolutely idolize Boris for that. And of course, now they're worried because if Boris, Mr. Brexit, is now gone from Parliament, might people in Parliament change their minds about Brexit? After all, potentially in the next general election, a lot of the pro-Brexit Conservatives are about to lose their seats and bring in, from what we can see, probably a lot of very, very pro-European Liberal Democrats, but also pro-Labour people as well. And eventually, maybe not, as I said, in the next Parliament, but the one after that, this is when, well, certainly I think in the next Parliament, we will get questions asked about Brexit. How can we improve our current situation? And as I always said, I think the situation in Labour you will get, this is the your Brexit. This is as good as it is ever going to get. And then in the next Parliament, you go, right, we're going to completely rethink Brexit. We're going to go and rejoin the single market and customs union because it is too damaging to our economy not to be in the single market and customs union. And then, of course, eventually, as we always said would eventually happen, they'll then go, well, look, we want to be full members of the EU because we want a say on what goes on in the regulations and the running of the single market and customs union. So we've got to be full EU members. So eventually that would be, and I think is going to be our path back. Because the pro EU movement is always going to be growing. Always. Young people are infinitely more pro EU than the older end. And of course, that older end that was very pro Brexit is, well, it's moving on, to be polite about it. And of course, lots of people are changing their minds, realizing that actually Brexit hasn't worked out the way that they were sold it as. And of course, Brexiteers oversold Brexit as it was going to be the balm to all our problems. All our problems were nothing to do with Parliament. No. It was all Brussels' fault. And of course, that's the stark lesson that we have certainly learned over the past couple of years. That's true. So today we're going to have a look at, of course, Nigel Farage peddling some Brexit paranoia because he's sure that there is now an establishment plot to reverse Brexit. Once again, fulfilling the true, desires of the Brexiteers of always to be the betrayed, but they always were the betrayer. So before we go diving into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, there's the YouTube thank you button and the Pony Club down below as well. So, as always, let's crack on with this then. So, this comes from The Telegraph with the title of There is an Establishment Plot to Reverse Brexit. For years, I read Boris Johnson's Telegraph column with great interest. And I was always pleased by his small state, low tax views. His skeptical approach to the EU during and after his tenure as Brussels correspondent was unfailingly humorous. And his opinions never went as far as mine in their opposition to the bloc, but they certainly pointed in the right direction. Perhaps the biggest division between us over the past 3 decades has been over immigration. Where I've always been worried about the increasing millions coming into our country, he seemed relaxed. And here's the thing, as we've said before, there's no real reason to worry about immigration, certainly in the way that Nigel Farage really worries about immigration, because immigration overwhelmingly is a net positive to this country. It's economically positive to this country. We have a big need for migrant labor. Like it or not, we do. All over this country, we have a deep need for it. And here's the thing: there's nothing wrong with an immigrant. If someone wants to, come here and become a British citizen, why are you going to stop them? If this is the best country in the world, why? Who are you to deny them that that joy when they want to come here, bring their start a family here, maybe from they were in worse conditions, they get a job. And bear in mind, most migrants are employed. If you look at the statistics, they're employed. They pay more into the state funds than they actually take out. Migrants overwhelmingly popular, but again, we're not here to talk about that today. We're talking about Nigel's little Brexit paranoia spin he's got. So, in 2019, I formed and led the Brexit Party, guaranteeing Theresa May's political obliteration and, in turn, opening the door to Boris Johnson's premiership, which began that July. Trying to take credit for the Brexit Party as the downfall of Theresa May, absolutely not. If you could say what was the one thing that guaranteed Theresa May's downfall, it wasn't you and the Brexit Party. It was always the ERG. It was the Brexiteers. It was the DUP. They were who brought down Theresa May, Nigel. You're grandstanding a bit too much there on that. Then, at the general election 5 months later, faced with the possibility of a Labour Lib Dem second EU referendum, again, what's wrong with a second referendum? This is something I would have always loved to ask Nigel Farage. What would have been wrong with a confirmatory second referendum? Because after all, people like him, Jacob Rees-Mogg, all these Brexiteers, always in the past, always used to say you can have a confirmatory referendum. What was wrong with having that? Again, they're terrified of democracy. Now that they've got the thing that they want, they're now terrified that they're going to lose it. And they will lose it because what they promised, what they were sold Brexit as to the people, never will materialize. So I determined that no Brexit Party candidate would stand against the Conservatives in 317 seats that they had won at the previous general election. That was agreed after Johnson committed to no regulatory alignment and leaving the EU in 2020. And of course, we know how that turned out. Like I say, even though there has been little to no regulatory changes here at the moment, businesses are overwhelmingly saying, no, we want that regulatory alignment. And if we do end up changing that regulatory alignment, well, then congratulations, you make it harder to trade with our closest trading partner, over more than half our international trade is carried out with. And of course, leaving the EU in 2020, well, at that time, I didn't think we'd seen COVID, popping up its head. But as people said, when this pandemic was clearly on its way, we were like, hey, should we maybe stop Brexit for the time being and deal with the pandemic first, then deal with Brexit and not have to deal with them at the same time? And by the looks of it, of the COVID inquiry, that seems to have been a big problem, that we were already taking up so much time with having to deal with Brexit and we couldn't deal with the pandemic response. But there you go. Just something we were right about that. So, in the end, he did indeed get Brexit done. Since then, however, I can only express disappointment and anger at how things have played out. Because, of course, to people like Nigel Farage and those true Brexiteers, Brexit is just never enough. The Brexit that even Boris Johnson offered was just never Brexity enough. They still haven't gone far enough. So, of course, there have been some successes. And again, they haven't really been successes. I believe that the country stands taller in the world now that we left the EU. That's absolutely bogus. Nigel Farage absolutely knows it. We do not stand taller in the world. We have diminished our standing on the world stage by the fact that essentially look at how Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, was treated in America. He wasn't treated very well at all. He was just given a pat on the head and, go back. That's it. America has even said several times, we're not really interested in you anymore. We'd rather more talk with Paris or with Berlin rather than London. But, you continue that belief. Our service industry is doing remarkably well. Is it? I don't think so. Our service industry doesn't seem to be doing remarkably well. Of course, by service industries, he probably doesn't mean things like, insurance, marketing, anything, you can sort of buy as a service. He probably just refers to the banking sector when he says service industry. But even then, we've seen jobs leave from the UK and from London go to Europe, America. The FTSE 100 has diminished. That is a massive blow to our service industry, or at least the banking industry. And our successful vaccine rollout proves that what can be done as an independent country. No, that doesn't prove anything at all. Yes, congratulations, we had a successful vaccine rollout, but it had absolutely nothing to do with us being an independent country or Brexit. Again, that's just Nigel desperately trying to tie anything he can to Brexit. So these things would have not been possible if Johnson, again, the vaccine rollout would have absolutely been possible because we were in the EU at the time and still having to follow many of the EU rules and regulations when the vaccine rollout happened. So absolutely, it was fully possible. But there you go. Of course, Farage will deny it. If Johnson had not made the historic decision to back Leave side in the referendum in 2016 for this, I will be totally grateful for him. I would even go so far as to say, had he not done so, a quarter of a century of my life would have been a failure, and his support got our vote over the line without question. Well, to be honest, your grand project is failing. So yeah, a quarter of your century of life is very much in failure, and eventually the UK will rejoin the EU. It's just a matter of time. And I really hope we do it when Nigel Farage is still alive, because oh, the saltiness. Oh, the saltiness that will come from Nigel Farage when that happens. Oh, but 7 years after the referendum and 3 years after leaving the EU, immigration, the single most important issue in persuading most people to back Brexit, is higher than ever, because Brexit had nothing to do with immigration. There were rules, there was all kinds of stuff that could have helped us deal with immigration that the Conservatives just did not follow through on. Once again, immigration really not that important an issue. People will say, "Oh my God, immigration!" It's not really that important issue. There's far more important things that affect your life, and immigration is probably the biggest smokescreen that can be deployed by people like Nigel Farage. So, of course, it was even higher. And in the past year, net migration has hit 600,000. Just as a matter of interest, how many people were born in the UK of 2020? So, the official figures for how many people were born in the UK in 2020 when Nigel Farage is complaining about 600,000 people being net migrations, where you've got over 624,000 people being live born here in the UK. Well, bear in mind, an immigrant, when they come over here, then they go through the whole process to apply for citizenship, etc., etc. They become a working member of society. Someone who is born is essentially a financial burden for years because we all have to pay for their education. We all have to pay for their healthcare. You know, there's all the child tax credits that they get access to. If you wanted to say who was more a financial burden, is it an immigrant who has just arrived in this country who can get a job, go on and live a very productive life, and almost immediately contribute to the good of the economy and the UK, or this this is my view. It's giving away my view on children. Or this sticky child that's just been born that we all have to pay and look after for at least the next 16 to 18 years. And again, if you're looking at me on the screen and thinking, oh, why are you making this comparison? It's because it should. Because people complaining about this and complaining about net migration, it's not a problem. It's not an issue. It is a smokescreen. You know, there are far, far, far bigger problems than migration in this country. Immigration is just not an issue. It's really a non-issue. And we've said many times on this channel, if you want to solve this problem, easy. Set up safe routes, refund the asylum system, which also means refunding the justice system, which the Conservatives have defunded and have been actively denying people access to justice. We've got cases going back to 2017. And not just minor cases, major cases as well. 2017. We've got a backlog of cases going back to, and that is because they have defunded the system. But anyway, yeah, we're getting off target here. But again, just to show you how important, like it really is, to have at least an awareness of the issue. And to be honest, migrants, they're just not a problem. They're just not an issue. Really not. So this startling number is seen by me and millions of others as a betrayal of Brexit. Well, no, here's the thing. You never had a plan for Brexit because Brexit was just this, again, an amorphous blob. It could be about immigration. It could be about trade. It could be about sovereignty. Brexit could be about anything Nigel or any Brexiteer wanted to be at a time, and they never really actually had a plan because it would be something that would always, not make certain people vote for it. Because if they start to define it around immigration, actually started just to talk about immigration, saying this is what we should do, then people who were attracted to voting for Brexit for various different reasons would get scared off it. That's why it was always just this amorphous blob and could be anything they wanted it to be. So add to that the fact that our small businesses have so far enjoyed none of the benefits of leaving the EU that should rightfully be theirs. Like what? What benefit? If anything, small businesses have lost out because they were able to sell to someone. If you've got a business up here in Sheffield, you could sell as someone to easily as you could in Leeds, as you could to someone in Rostov in Germany. Could be that easy. Now they don't have that. They've got all this extra paperwork, all this extra costs that they just cannot afford. This is a complete lie that these small businesses have should be having all these benefits and they are not enjoying. That is a complete lie because Brexit has taken away a lot of rights that they used to enjoy that they no longer enjoy because of Farage wanting this hard Brexit and wanting an even harder Brexit. And he continues, and it is not hard to see why a third of Brexit voters believe the project has failed. Of course, again, not wanting to believe that, the problem itself is Brexit, which it always was. So a big part of the problem has been that so many influential individuals and groups never accepted the referendum result. Here's the thing. They say, oh, you've got to accept the referendum result. Well, you don't have to accept the referendum result. It was a democratic choice because otherwise, you can go on making the argument. Otherwise, every single general election, you're basically saying that everyone who didn't vote Conservative should become Conservative because you've got to believe in the Conservative government and you've got to support that Conservative government because, after all, they won that vote. That has how the Brexiteers have been acting, that you must support Brexit regardless of problems or anything like that. And the thing is, I will never support Brexit because we have lost out. It has damaged this country. There is no Brexit argument that Nigel Farage could give me that would turn me to supporting his cause because there's nothing he could give. We've just the small business alone, the idea that small businesses should be benefiting from leaving the EU when they have actively not. It's actively damaged them. It just speaks volumes to how much he doesn't go into detail on all this stuff because that's Nigel Farage. It's just smokescreen. Look at this, look at that, look at this, look at this. Don't look at the real figures. So, the London-based corporate business, much of the media class, and a great deal of the education sector have sought to overturn or undermine the vote at every opportunity. There are no limits to what the anti-Brexit campaigner will do, including portraying Brexit voters as knuckle-dragging racists. Well, as we always said, unfortunately, not everyone who voted for Brexit was racist, but I know a couple of people who did vote for Brexit who do feel that they unwittingly made an alliance with racists by voting for Brexit, and that's how they've just sort of felt even back then since their vote, and they regret voting that way. So, do you not think then that maybe we should get another chance to sort of vote again, or maybe let's say 2-3 years from now, maybe have another referendum on the subject? So, another figure who was instrumental in trying to overturn the will of the people was the former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, who seemed to do his very best to help Parliament secure a second vote. No, that's not what happened. He was just following the rules. Because if you are saying that, then there is a ton of stuff that Brexiteers could have done to just oust John Bercow from the Speaker's seat. And they never did because John Bercow was following the procedure of what many of the people at the time wanted when we were talking about the parliamentary chaos, where we sort of took control and we had all those series of indicative votes about what people wanted. And remember, the one that almost won and only lost by 3 votes was remaining in the customs union. And that was the offer put forward by Ken Clarke. And the one for the hardest possible Brexit that not people like Nigel Farage wanted and eventually we got, how many MPs voted for that? 60. 60 MPs out of the 600 MPs that were sitting in Parliament at that time. Only 60 voted for the hardest possible Brexit. More of them voted, unfortunately not enough. More people voted for staying in the customs union than for that incredibly hard no deal Brexit. They should just walk away. Because again, it's not really in the reality of it all. But again, there we go. Like I say, this is Nigel Farage. So, these various attempts to try and subvert democracy should have come to an end, and after the Tories under Johnson won the general election so resoundingly in December of 2019. Let's not forget how many traditional Labour voters helped return him to Downing Street. And again, let's not forget how many of those traditional Labour voters regret voting for their vote and will probably not vote for the Tories again. Let's remember that, Nigel. Altogether, the whole ordeal, which continues to this day, proves Johnson right when he says in his statement, I am not alone in thinking that there is a witch hunt underway to take revenge for Brexit and ultimately to reverse the 2016 referendum result. Well, to reverse the referendum result, you would need at least a good chunk of MPs in Parliament to put forward the legislation to have another referendum. That's not happening at this moment anytime soon. Yet, it is a witch hunt that the Tories have enabled. And now they have lost their only senior figure who had populist appeal. The Liberal elites are now back in control. And of course, again, it's funny talking for Farage talking about elites when he himself is an elite. Those who believe in Brexit, free markets, and a small state have been routed. Again, this libertarian ideology that Farage spoke, the idea of this is what Brexit means, it's all free market, it's small state, the Singapore on the Thames, that the Brexiteers used to salivate at. If that was the actual idea put forward by the Leave campaign in 2016, that's what they were going to do. We were going to do the Singapore on Thames. It was only going to be free markets and we were going to massively reduce the size of the state. Then Brexit, your Brexit would have never have crossed the line. That is the truth. So you need to look no further than the Windsor Framework. Of course, blaming the Windsor Framework. The establishment that hailed it as a Brexit breakthrough. In fact, it keeps Northern Ireland cut off from the rest of Britain. Still, despite its shortcomings, only 22 Tory backbenchers voted against it, one of whom was Johnson. And we are back to where we were this time of the time of the Maastricht Treaty back in the early 1990s. So essentially, Farage is saying we're potentially about to revote for the Maastricht Treaty and potentially start all the process for rejoining the EU. Oh, I look forward to that. And if that's the case, Nigel, I look forward to that. And like I say, oh, the saltiness. This is why I really do hope we rejoin the EU when Nigel Farage is still alive, because the saltiness he will write about that fact would just be, glorious. Anyway, let's finish this off. So, soon we could face a Labour government, which would waste no time in aligning us with the single market rules. Again, that will be absolutely no problem. The vast majority of businesses, in fact, most of the businesses in the UK, if not all of them, want that. So under Starmer will be Beano. Brexit in name only will take root. Without an opposition to fight for an independent Britain, it will only be a matter of time before we become an associate member of the EU. Brexit will be dead, and our country, along with the rest of the EU, will be condemned to decline. We are declining now. We are declining now faster than we were when we were a member of the EU. Once again, Farage, benefits. Oh, what's this? It's just a piece of paper with hand scrawled Brexit benefit. Yes, I'm giving out Brexit benefits, but it's just a piece of paper written in crayon. Brexit benefit, Nigel. What do you mean benefit? Like say, take the example, small business. Small businesses have a harder time now trading with their main source. And we've gone over on this channel time and time again of businesses that have been affected because of Brexit, because of all these trade barriers that have gone up, because of all this extra paperwork, because of all the custom stuff. It is no longer viable for a small company to trade into the EU. And it has been massively negative. And when we do all these free market trade deals that Nigel Farage wants us to do, it's going to be incredibly harder for a small business to do business here, because there'll be all these cheap imports flooding into the country. And how is a small business meant to compete against those? Again, Nigel Farage, when you start to really pick away at his ideology, is just so paper thin and flimsy. But it's Nigel Farage. So there's some nice, Brexit paranoia for you on a Saturday afternoon. Like I say, as Morton Joe said, be careful not to become too addicted to it, so else you may regret its absence when it leaves you. So as always, thank you very much for joining me today, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.